Hey, this is Nicky G and welcome to Better Commander. Today we're taking on Elminster's Flying Circus. Hey listen, I'm not a wizard, I just kind of pretend to be one on YouTube, but I'm saving up my gems and my fairy dust. So subscribe to my channel. For every sub, YouTube gives me 1/1,000,000th of a ruby, so you can help me on my way there. Elminster has a ton of lore on the Forgotten Realms wiki. This guy is the Gandalf of that world. He's an ancient, powerful mage, who also happens to be a buff old man that can shapeshift into a beholder if he wants to. This Silver Fox is a perfect fit for the MTG multiverse, and he makes an awesome commander. Let's read the card. Elminster is 3 white and a blue for a legendary planeswalker. So he starts with 5 loyalty, and he can be your commander. Whenever you scry, the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn costs X less to cast, where X is the number of cards looked at while scrying this way. +2, draw a card, then scry 2. -3, exile the top card of your library. Create a number of 1/1 blue Faerie Dragon creature tokens with flying equal to that card's mana value. Alright, so he comes down with 5 loyalty, and if you +2 him the first time, he's going to have 7. So make sure he doesn't get attacked to death immediately, and with 7 loyalty, that's not likely. The first ability cheapens our instant and sorceries by the amount of our last instance of scry, meaning if you scry 4, then you can reduce the cost of a spell by 4. Then later in the turn, if you scry 3, you can reduce the next spell by 3. It's not cumulative. Get that through your thick skull, you megalodon. So the +2 cheapens our next spell by 2 after drawing a card, and the -3 is a win condition by itself. So this commander wants cheap scry spells and super large instants and sorceries. He also makes flyers, so creatures and enchantments that buff flyers will come in handy as well. Overall, this deck is a blast to play. You're constantly doing things and wielding the arcane power that can only be accrued by the age and experience of an old man, which is what I am anyway. I identify with this guy. So what are some scry-specific synergies and payoffs and enablers? First, we have Elegeth Crossroads Augur. She's 4 blue for a legendary creature, Sphinx. It's a 5/6 with flying. If you would scry a number of cards, draw that many cards instead, also as partner. This deck is filled with scry, so this is a bit of a non-bow with our commander, but drawing that amount of cards is definitely worth it. If you get this guy out, just pivot into drawing cards and casting things. I'd never even seen this card before. Netherese Puzzle-Ward, 3 and a blue for an enchantment. It has Focus Beam. At the beginning of your upkeep, roll a d4. Scry X, where X is the result. And it has Perfect Illumination. Whenever you roll a die's highest natural result, draw a card. This works perfectly for our deck and can sculpt our draws and maybe draw us an extra card every once in a while. Oath of Teleri, 3 white and a blue for a legendary enchantment. When Oath of Teleri enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent you control, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. You may activate loyalty abilities of planeswalkers you control twice each turn rather than only once. Okay, so we give pseudo vigilance to an attacking creature or double up on an ETB and activate Elminster twice. So that's going to be awesome because we can +2 him and then -3 him. The scry will help us get something hot on top of our library, then we can eliminate it with the -3 and just make a ton of tokens. Let's talk about some flying synergies and flying things. Empyrean Eagle is 1 white and a blue for a creature bird spirit. It's a 2/3 with flying. Other creatures you control with flying get +1/+1. Let's do another one too. Thunderclap Wyvern is 2 white and a blue for a creature drake, 2/3 with flash and flying. Other creatures you control with flying get +1/+1. Saphara Sky's Blade is 4 white for a legendary creature angel. It's a 7/7. You may pay white and tap 4 untapped creatures you control with flying rather than pay the spell's mana cost. It has flying and lifelink. Other creatures you control with flying have indestructible. So this can be really cheap if you just activated Elminster's -3 and you have this in your hand. You can cast it for 1 white mana. Which is fantastic, and it puts a wall of indestructible blockers in front of Elminster to help protect them. Innia has the Gale Force, 3 blue for a legendary creature Jinn. It's a 4/4 with flying. It has 2 white or a blue. Attacking creatures with flying get +1/+1 until the end of turn. And whenever 3 or more creatures you control with flying attack, each player gains control of a non-land permanent of your choice, controlled by the player to their right. So let's give our opponent a token and take their commander or whatever. Innia's doesn't have to attack, and the damage doesn't have to get through. Plus you can instant speed buff your tokens with excess mana. This is a really cool card in this deck and frustrating for our opponents. This isn't really a flying payoff, but more of a token payoff, but I'll put it here. Curiosity Crafter is 3 and a blue for a creature. It's a bird wizard, 3/3 with flying. You have no maximum hand size. That's going to come in real handy in this deck. Whenever a creature token you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. This is going to keep our hands full. He's a flyer itself, or she, I don't know, it's a bird. We also have several instant and sorcery payoffs, which are coming up next. Talrand, of course. Talrand Sky Summoner is 2 blue for a legendary creature, Merfolk Wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. It's 2/2. So I have a commander deck built around this guy. I did a whole video on him, and you can check out my whole video later. But this guy is also a beast in this deck, and he makes flyers. Archmage Emeritus is 2 blue for a creature, human wizard. It's a 2/2. Very similar stat line to Talrand. It also has whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. It's very powerful in a deck like this to keep our hand stocked. I've been singing this guy's praises since it was spoiled, and it's creeping up in price. I would say you probably need to buy a couple copies now if you don't have any. Also threw in a Jace's Sanctum. It's 3 and a blue for an enchantment. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, scry 1. So I threw the Sanctum in here to further reduce spell costs and get bonus scrying as well. And speaking of scrying, there's about 15 to 17 scry cards and top deck manipulation cards. Faerie Seer and Augury Owl are cheap flyers that enter and scry. The reality chip. This is going in quite a few decks lately. So the reality chip can let us know what's on top and keep the gas on by digging us to big spells for Elminster to exile for massive token generation. Cryptic Annelid. This is 3 and a blue for a creature. It's a worm beast. It's a 1/4. Whenever Cryptic Annelid enters the battlefield, scry 1, then scry 2, then scry 3. This can potentially dig us 6 deep and comes in super handy to put a big spell to the top of the library. I don't know how to say this one's name. Siani, Eye of the Storm. It's 3 and a blue for a legendary creature, Jin Monk. It's a 3/2 with flying. Whenever Siani or Eye of the Storm attacks, scry X, where X is the number of attacking creatures with flying. This can be a huge number in this deck. So it also has partner. This card is awesome. Mystic Speculation is 1 blue for a scry 3. It has a buyback at 2, but I wanted to ask you guys what you think. What the heck is going on in this art? This dude's just stabbing some jellyfish, or what the heck is he doing? It's crazy. Got some other little scry spells like Serum Visions, draw cards, scry 2, sorcery. Also put in a couple medium-sized scry spells. Tamiyo's Epiphany, it's 3 and a blue for a sorcery, scry 4, then draw 2 cards. A side effect of all this scry and draw is that we'll be running into our 2-mana rocks that help us cast our bigger spells. These aren't just for exiling with Elminster. We can often ramp ahead and cast a 7-mana spell on turn 5 if we're lucky. Now let's talk about some bigger spells. Hour of Reckoning is 4 white for a sorcery, has Convoke, and it's destroy all non-token creatures. So if we're getting beaten up by our opposing commanders, we can clear the board and keep Elminster and his fairy friends safe. Alright, and if we're really behind, we can cast Vanquish the Horde at 6 white for a sorcery. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, and it's destroy all creatures. So this rarely costs 8 to cast, but we can get 8 Faerie Dragons from Elminster's -3. I included a bunch of other large casting costs, sorceries and instants. We have Treasure Cruise, Aminatu's Augury, Stormherd. Stormherd is a win condition by itself, and a few other big mana value cards that can really jack up our opponents. If we can get these on top of the library, Elminster can weaponize them into flyers. I also included 2 miracle cards, Terminus and Banishing Stroke, which this much top of the library manipulation, we can sculpt our timing with these if we need to cast them for cheap, or we can send them to exile for Faerie Dragons. Perplexing Test can really screw up our opponents as well. So Perplexing Test is 3 blue for an instant. Choose 1. Return all creature tokens to their owner's hands, which is probably not what we're going to want to do, or return all non-token creatures to their owner's hands. We'll probably opt for tokens to stay on the battlefield and then recast our Anthem creatures as needed. Alright, so we're currently relying on 1/1 fairy tokens for our win condition, and that's not going to be super reliable even if we can create quite a few. And while we can reliably make a ton of tokens, we need a backup win condition. So we have Approach of the Second Sun, which is 6 and a white for a sorcery. If this spell was cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Sun, this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach of the Second Sun into its owner's library, 7th from the top. It's incredibly easy in this deck to dig down 6 cards after the first cast. All you need to do is cast the second one anyway. It doesn't matter if it's countered as long as you're casting it. And if we don't feel like doing that, we can exile it for 7 little buddies as well. So please take a look at the deck list, see what you think. This is fun to goldfish. It's going to be fun to play. It's going to be a fun deck to pilot. And not counting Elminster, this can be had for under $100 if you put it in a TCG player. So most of the huge mana spells are pretty cheap. A lot of the scry spells are pretty cheap. Elegith is like 20 cents. I also put in a lot of interaction and removal so we can keep our opponents slowed down so we can dig deep for our win conditions. Thanks as always for watching. This is going to be Nicky G from Better Commander, signing off.